Ready to say yes with me? All right. I say yes to the goodness. I say yes to love. I say yes to abundance raining down from up above. I say yes. I say yes to the goodness. I say yes to love. I say yes to abundance raining down from up above. I say yes. I say yes. I say yes.
Thank you, Dina, Andrew, Jonathan, and Matt. Thank you so much. That was a fabulous Amy Steinberg song, Say Yes. Dina doing an awesome job with that, and it's a perfect opportunity for us to think about and realize the power of our minds to say yes to the truth, and to say yes, we can, yes, we will. This is a powerful opportunity and affirmation. And as we are walking through our theme of realizing the power of the mind, today we're working also with a global vision statement. We see a world in which humanity rediscovers the creative power of thought. So that's our focus for today. Now, I could be talking about the amazing things neuroscience is teaching us about the brain, or we could talk about the radical notions that the Rabbi Jesus taught about the power of the word, of faith and belief. But instead, partly based on the current issues that are facing us in our nation today, I thought I would go back to something that we all learned in kindergarten. The power of the mind directed by an attitude. In my son's gym in elementary school, it said right there in blazing colors, attitude is everything. And they taught that if you could believe it in yourself, if you could imagine yourself achieving something, then you could do it. And they were taught in elementary school, yes, I can, and that my attitude makes a difference. And so when we think about today, as we move into this conversation, there's this fabulous phrase that comes out of aeronautics. It says, attitude determines altitude. In the aeronautics, the orientation of an aircraft or spacecraft relative to the direction of travel is the attitude. Attitude determines your altitude. So if your attitude is like this, where are you going? And if your attitude is like this, where are you going? Yeah. And it has to do with the attitude. If you're pitching and rolling, how are you level with the horizon? If your attitude is like this, man, you just cruise along. And so this is so ingrained in them from the mechanics of the airplane that they've begun teaching this as motivational, as an understanding about ourselves. Colonel John Lipinski says this. This comes from the Travis Air Force Base. Aviators refer to an attitude indicator to determine the position of the aircraft in relation to the horizon. The attitude determines whether the aircraft is vectored to climb or descend. With proper internal guidance, you can effectively motivate yourself to focus your talents and skills and propel yourself forward toward your goals. The flight path vector does not aim toward excuses, but fixes steadily on the projected destination. Our attitude determines our altitude, and whether or not we are flying through life calm and poised, moving up in the direction that we choose, or not. Ernest Holmes, our founder, says this: everything in our lives is a creative activity of one form or another. Some people create good for themselves, others create bad, while most of us seem to be kind of somewhere in the middle, create a little bit of both. And as we grow in knowledge and conviction, become familiar with the way the laws work, we are more and more able to swing and more able to swing the creative activity of our thought to the favorable side. See, the airplane doesn't fly itself, right? Somebody's at the helm, at the wheel, guiding that altitude by the attitude. So our attitude is the results of the thoughts we hold predominantly in our mind. It's like the mental atmosphere that we walk around with. Recognizing the power of our attitude about things, events, and people is a significant part of realizing the creative power of our thought. So it's not just individual thoughts. Do you see? Attitude is the sum total of what we are generally thinking about, what we are focusing our mental attention on, what we're constantly kind of ruminating on. That conglomeration becomes our attitude. Now, in the science of mind, we teach has to be one of my favorite, most powerful, most esoteric, deepest thoughts we have in the science of mind. Are you ready? Oh, you don't sound ready. That was a minuscule yes, wasn't it, Dina? That was a little tiny yes. Are you ready? Oh, yes, there you go. We were practicing that. All right, so here it is. This is my favorite thing that we teach. Look for the good and praise it. Really, we're in kindergarten, right? It feels like this is kindergarten stuff. And yet this is the foundation of an attitude that changes everything. And it is that thing that we can do that raises our consciousness to a higher altitude, that raises our vibrational rate no matter what is going on. Whether it's going on in our own lives or in the lives of people we love or in the collective life around us, when we look for the good and praise it, it changes our very vibrational rate, changes the altitude of our consciousness. Now, here's this wonderful quote. You may recognize it. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Viktor Frankl, written from his experience in the concentration camps. This month, March 26th, would be his birthday, and so it seems appropriate to turn to some of his deep wisdom as we think about not only our own lives, the attitude that's in our own lives, but the attitudes that we see in our political landscape today. Viktor Frankl discovered the importance of this attitude in the concentration camp. Except for his sister, everyone in his immediate family, including his wife, died in those camps. This is what he says. We stumbled on in the darkness, over big stones and through large puddles along the one road leading from the camp. The accompanying guards kept shouting at us and driving us with the butts of their rifles. Anyone with very sore feet supported himself on his neighbor's arm. Hardly a word was spoken. The icy wind did not encourage talk. Hiding his mouth behind his upturned collar, the man marching next to me whispered suddenly, "If our wives could see us now, I do hope they're better off in their camps and don't know what is happening to us." That brought thoughts of my own wife to mind. And as we stumbled on for miles, slipping on icy spots, supporting each other time and again, dragging one another up and onward, nothing was said, but we both knew each of us was thinking of his wife. Occasionally, I looked up at the stars, at the sky where the stars were fading and the pink light of the morning was beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. But my mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with an uncanny acuteness. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, her look was then more luminous than the sun, which was beginning to rise. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth, as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. So we have no greater teacher for this topic of love and compassion and understanding than the master teacher, the Rabbi Jesus. Ernest Holmes writes in this fabulous book that we've been reading, always the great teacher deals with reality. How can we see the light for ourselves without taking others into the light? How can we receive without giving? How can anyone live exclusively if he belongs to a universe which is inclusive? How can one find God in himself without discovering God in others? Jesus was no mere soft-spoken teacher. His love was so great that he did not hesitate to teach the law of that love. God will not and cannot change his nature to suit our whimsical fancy or our bigotry. Justice, like love and mercy, flows. We cannot enter the stream without flowing along with it. And he goes on. We are hypocrites if we try to give what we do not possess. This calls for a terrific soul searching, a complete inward healing. By the same token, wherever we have first healed ourselves, we shall be able to help others. If we are free from the blight of fear, we can help others to a place of faith. If our whole consciousness responds to love, our presence automatically will heal hate. Changing the altitude of consciousness through an attitude, a disciplined attitude that we choose, no matter what. Frankl also often said that even within the narrow boundaries of the concentration camps, he found only two types of people to exist: decent and unprincipled ones. These are found in all classes, ethnicities, and groups. So we might ask ourselves, which am I most of the time? Individually, we can ask ourselves, are we decent or unprincipled? And is it different in our thoughts than it is in our actions? Do I think one thing, but act another so as to please someone or be acceptable? Do I have fears and prejudices lurking in my own subconscious? These questions become profoundly powerful in today's political climate, in which the cultural fear and hatred, violence and anger has been stirred and perhaps brought to the surface. There's a story a friend of mine told me of talking to a man at work just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And the man was saying, well, what's being said is just what we all think anyway. And she said, no, that's not true. It's certainly not true for me. So as Dina so beautifully sung, right, we're in charge of our yes and our no. No to the fear, no to the darkness. Yes to that which alters our lives, that which clears and cleans and changes our own individual consciousness, which is exactly and precisely what it seems to me is happening on the collective. What's being surfaced are old fears, old ideas, old thoughts that are still clinging in our collective psyche. And they are being brought to the surface to heal by our yes for that which we stand for and our no for that which we do not. And we ourselves get to look at our own internal psyche, not only for our own personal lives, but in relationship to others. Do we speak one way, but secretly, occasionally think another? I've seen it in my own personal life in the past, hanging around people, gays who will only hang around with other gay people. What do you mean? You brought a straight person? Why would you do that? Do you see, it lurks within all of us in some form or fashion. And our job is to bring it to the surface, and to allow it to be revealed as the untruth that it is, that we may shine the light of consciousness on it. Ernest Holmes goes on to say this: all our thoughts, feelings, and emotions find a permanent center within, from which they react upon our physical bodies and our physical environments. They control us until we control them. Now, if we add the subjective reactions of all the individual lives together, we arrive at what has been called the collective unconscious, and what the Bible calls the carnal mind, or the C. This really means the law of mind in action both individually and collectively. In this collective mind, the thoughts and beliefs which the whole race has accepted are laid down, acting as a law of human conduct and influencing everyone. The law of mind in action, wrongly used by the collective group, brings confusion upon the whole earth, just as it does to our individual life. Moses had the power to part these psychic waters. It was left to the supreme spiritual wisdom of Jesus to walk over them, to still the waves and the storms of the psychic life. And when Revelation states that there shall be no more sea, it refers to that time when the entire human race confusion shall have been done away with through a knowledge of our unity with God. Amen. So do you see, we have our conscious mind, which is where we do our spiritual work to heal our own personal unconscious, subconscious mind, and to bring those old thoughts to the surface so we can look at them and say, no, that's not the spiritual truth. I'm no longer going to believe in lack. I'm no longer going to believe that I'm not enough. I'm no longer going to believe this, that, or the other thing. And do you see, that same thing is happening on the collective level. Because we have not only our personal subconscious, unconscious mind, but there is this larger collective unconscious mind that moves through what Rupert Sheldrake called our morphogenetic field, the field of consciousness that we all share. Now, we talk about this a lot in spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is a powerful understanding of the evolution of culture, and that the evolution of culture is an outpicturing of the evolving consciousness of the human race. And I remember 35 years ago when I first got into New Thought, I remember people talking about, it's happening, we're starting to see the transformation. We're starting to see change. We're starting to see businesses and corporations look for the triple bottom line. We're seeing an emerging spirituality outside of a religious dogma. We even got up in the middle of the night to do peace meditations. Remember that? Through the Cold War and ending all of that, bringing the wall down in Berlin. I remember then people saying we will have to watch out for the violent thrashing of the death throes of an old way of thinking and being. And things will really start rattling when that happens. Now, isn't this similar to what we experience ourselves when we decide to grow? Anything and everything, unlike our new positive attitude, comes up to face us, doesn't it? Oh, I've decided I'm going to be loving and peaceful. I've had my meditation, and the very first thing that happens is I'm slammed into traffic and somebody starts cutting me off. And then I have to call my mother while I'm on the phone. And then I have to deal with those people at work who really annoy me. And then I have to listen to the news, and on it goes, right? All the places that trigger us, that keep us from living in that place of love and peace, the more that we enter into that consciousness, the more the stark relief is when we get caught on that old way of thinking. It's revealed so that it can be healed, so that we get to affirm and practice until the new thought, the new attitude is in our very bones, in the DNA, in the cellular memory of our being, where it becomes lodged then as the new thought in our subjective mind. Maybe what we're seeing now is that we're getting to do it collectively at the deepest possible level. Things are really rattling, aren't they? So we get to be the consciousness of peace, loving our diversity and seeing the good in everyone and praising it. This is a consciousness that raises us above fear and hatred, outside of violence and anger. And this is the attitude that raises the vibrational rate of the collective consciousness as a whole. This is the power of our minds to change the course of history, not just for our own personal use. And since we do our own personal life individually, it makes sense that we do our collective life communally, doesn't it? Part of the way that we move through this in our collective consciousness is that we work together. Today's media bombardment and faceless corporate structures can easily create distance, mistrust, fear, and even a sense that there isn't anything I can do. Well, it's just always going to be this way. Similar to our own attitude when we feel trapped in repeating our own history. We feel a void and a vague discontent in our lives. This arises from an existential vacuum, a feeling of meaninglessness, which is common when we are experiencing this and is characterized by boredom, apathy, and emptiness. One feels cynical, lacks direction, and questions the point of most of our life's activities. Why bother? Why bother do anything? It's not really going to change anyway. Do you see, we have those thoughts on the individual level sometimes when the deepest subconscious beliefs that we have are surfacing, and we can have those thoughts collectively as well. So what we really need is community. It's our responsibility to create community so that we are creating a collective consciousness that is the new thought that we seek to express. To create that community and get involved in that community, as so many of you have in this last week, 2 weeks in our remodeling, which has been truly an extraordinary outpouring. When we get involved in our local community, like here at CSLDallas, in our Dallas community, and in the community of our nation, we begin to contribute to that collective consciousness. You see, apathy and denial won't change anything. Just as apathy and denial won't change anything in our own lives. By surrounding ourselves with community of love and peace, truth, and how it works, this is a deliberate act of intending good, speaking for good, and acting from the value of love and connection, that we participate in the creation of a peaceful and prosperous world. This is a way to not only realize the power of the mind, creative, individually and collectively, but to use the power of the mind to create the attitude in this law of mind that we want, that we choose, that we are determined to create in this world. Now, since we're talking about Viktor Frankl recommended, when he came to the United States, he recommended that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of the U.S. be complemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West. Here's what he said. Freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. Isn't that what we teach in the science of mind? We are free to have any life we choose, and we are responsible for creating it. That is why I recommend, he says, that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West. So the foundation for the Statue of Responsibility has designed this statue. And this statue is currently being worked on by a sculptor, Gary Lee Price. And you can go out on the website and you can participate in this project to bring this statue about, that it will be built and placed on the West Coast to balance our Statue of Liberty. I find this to be extremely important and moving personally. I find some of the things that are going on in our political realm right now, I am doing a lot of spiritual work around it for myself, not to fall into fear or anger. This is the work that is ours to do. Many of you know this, some of you may not. I am the product of an immigrant family. My parents moved here the year before I was born from Germany. Both my parents were raised during the Second World War. And my mother, in memory of this, for my sister and I, she wrote a book called Feet in the Fire about growing up as a non-Nazi, non-Jew in this time period. And she has in her book this quote from Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And so we ask ourselves, what is our responsibility? What is our responsibility? To be that attitude that raises the consciousness, that lifts the vibrational rate. Pastor Martin Niemöller, a German Protestant pastor, he is credited with writing this, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Now we know the story. 6 million Jews gassed in the concentration camps. Viktor Frankl, one of the few that survived. Maybe you don't know that another 6 million people were gassed, for a total of 12 million people. Those other 6 million, Catholics, thinkers, scientists, artists, homosexuals. Oh, those people from across the border, the gypsies, who had no place in Germany. The undesirables. What did they include? People with disabilities, in wheelchairs, on crutches, with mental retardation or mental disability. In short, anyone who didn't fit. Yes, the Jews bore the brunt of that beyond measure, beyond any other group. But there were 6 million other people that were included. This particular poem, if you so will, has many iterations. And so when Pastor Martin was asked, well, what did you really say? He says this: "There are no minutes or copy of what I said, and it may be that I formulate it differently, but the idea is anyhow this. The communists, we still let it happen calmly. And the trade unions, we also let that happen. And we even let the social democrats happen. All of that was not our affair. The church did not concern itself with politics at all at that time, and it shouldn't have anything to do with them either, we thought. And yet in the confessing church, we didn't want to represent any political resistance per se, but we did want to determine for the church that that which was not right, and that it should not become right in the church. And that's why in 1933, we created the Pastors' Emergency Federation. And it was in that first document in 1933 that for the first time, a Protestant church made a statement of no. No, this is not okay. No, this is not part of what we believe. So here we are. These same ideas we can apply to our own lives. We can apply to the collective experience of humanity, starting with us, here in our nation, and then in the world. In aeronautics, they talk about attitude, the orientation of an aircraft or spacecraft relative to the direction of travel. Attitude determines altitude. Are we sucked into an attitude? Or are we responsible and steady and strong and committed to the attitude that we choose? Will our yes before that attitude and our no be no to fear, no to darkness? What attitude will we take? With what thoughts, fear or love, will we use the power of mind? It is in our power to raise consciousness, our own and the collective. Let us take the responsibility to do our part in helping humanity realize the creative power of thought and the power of our own mind, and to use it for good. So I want to close as we think about this world that we're creating for everyone. I want to close with these writings by Dr. Ernest Holmes. And I'm going to love to invite Andrew up here to the platform, to the piano, if he would be so willing. Here he comes. Here he comes. And he says yes. That's right. So I just invite you to take these words in. These are Dr. Ernest Holmes talking about the teachings of Jesus. Watching the lives of those who have to some degree mastered their thoughts, we can imagine what would happen if the majority of the human race should do so. War, poverty, and human indignity would cease. We do not know when this will be brought about, but all human evolution is moving toward this divine event. We have already reached a point where we are subduing physical laws to individual and collective purposes. And the next great endeavor is to be in the realm of mind and spirit. Now, this psychic redemption of humanity is not to be laughed off. There are physical laws, psychical laws, and spiritual laws. It is only when the physical and psychological are brought under control of the spiritual that the kingdom of heaven can come on earth. That divine event which the wise have prophesied, the poets written about, and the hope of man reached toward is not an illusion. It is the greatest of all possibilities, the highest of all realities. The universal soul cannot exclude anyone from its warm embrace, but we cannot be conscious of that embrace while we refuse it to others. Jesus taught the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man and the sisterhood of woman. This fatherhood cannot be realized unless and until it includes the brotherhood. In our own stupidity, we like to include the fatherhood for ourselves only. We like to be right among all people. We like to feel that our own method is the only correct one, or our own viewpoint. But reality will be accepted on its own terms alone. These terms include the necessity that we see all humanity on the pathway of one divine and certain destiny, that we be willing to walk along with others, helping and being helped, loving and being loved, giving and being given to, until finally, through love and compassion, that compassion we have for each other, we find that greater love, which is the very givingness of life itself to each and everyone. Let us pray. And as we breathe into that deep and powerful truth, we breathe into the infinite reality of the one. One love, one life, one divine, universal presence. One. A loving and compassionate presence that loves so much, it has become life itself, and moves in, through, and as all creation. That life is my life and your life, and the life of all beings everywhere and all people. And as we anchor ourselves in this truth, let us stand in the yes. We stand in the yes of love, of peace, of inclusivity. We stand in the yes of the healing of anything in our collective consciousness that no longer serves this greater idea that each and every person is a divine expression of life itself. We say yes to that which stands in our own consciousness, being responsible for our willingness to heal, to grow, to become more, to see more clearly, and to speak our yes. Let us affirm this morning that our yes is yes and our no is no. We stand and say no to fear, no to darkness, no to hatred and violence. No, this has no place in the kingdom of heaven. And because we are firm in our truth, that truth lifts us as it lifts the consciousness of humanity itself. And we walk across the troubled waters with faith, with truth, and with the conviction that love is, in fact, the attitude we choose, the very life of the divine itself. And we call it good, and we praise it.